The Valkyrie warfleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at exactly 1400 hours, and 300 warships appeared against the black canvas of space like a wall of polished bone. I stood on the observation deck of Pinnacle Reach, the Coalition's largest diplomatic station, and I watched every single one of those vessels glide into a formation, so precise it looked like it had been carved by a machine. Their hulls were white, streaked with deep crimson kill marks, and each mark represented a battle won, a species humbled, a world brought to its knees. I counted the marks on the lead vessel and stopped at 200 because my hands were shaking, and I did not want anyone standing near me to notice. My name is Nathan Vance, Commander Nathan Vance, tactical officer aboard the United Earth Navy cruiser Gallipoli, and at that moment, I was 11 months into what should have been a quiet diplomatic assignment at the edge of known space. Humanity had joined the Galactic Coalition less than a year ago. We were the newest species at the table, the smallest presence in the fleet, and until that afternoon, most of the galaxy treated us as a curiosity, something to study over drinks at diplomatic receptions, something to smile at politely, and then ignore when the real decisions were being made. The Valkyrie were about to change that forever. Their Supreme Commander's voice cut across every open channel on the station like a blade drawn across glass. His name was Torvon, and he spoke with the kind of authority that comes from 600 years of never being told no. His species had held the title of the galaxy's supreme warrior civilization for longer than most human nations had existed. Every Valkyrie child entered a combat academy at the age of 4. Their soldiers trained in live-fire exercises before they learned to read. Their navy conducted fleet maneuvers with the kind of precision that other species could only simulate. Their fleet had not lost a major engagement in recorded galactic history, not once, not a single time. Not ever. I speak to the Coalition, Torvon said, and his translated voice boomed through every corridor, every compartment, every observation lounge on Pinnacle Reach. I speak to the council members, the ambassadors, the fleet commanders, and the merchants who have grown comfortable beneath the protection of Valkyrie strength. 11 months ago, you admitted a species to this body without consulting those of us who bled to build it. You invited creatures from a single world at the far edge of the spiral arm, soft creatures, small creatures, creatures who have never proven themselves in the fires of galactic war. This is an insult to every species that earned its seat through sacrifice, and the Valkyrie Dominion does not accept insults. I looked across the observation deck. Diplomats from a dozen species had gathered to watch the fleet's arrival, and I could see the fear rippling through them like a wave moving through tall grass. The Drethani ambassador, a tall insectoid figure with compound eyes that reflected the starlight in fractured rainbows, was clutching the railing with all 4 of her hands so tightly that the metal was bending. The Melkari trade delegate had gone completely still, the way his species does when they detect a predator nearby. Even the Korvathi military attaché, a being who outweighed the largest Valkyrie by a factor of 3 and wore natural armor plating that could stop a blade, looked uneasy. His massive hands were clasped behind his back, but I could see the muscles in his forearms twitching. That was the power of the Valkyrie. They did not need to fight you to defeat you, they just needed you to remember that they could. I invoke the Kael'than, Torvon continued, and the station went so silent I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I did not know the word at the time, but I learned it quickly enough. The Kael'than was a formal challenge ritual, embedded deep in Coalition law. It predated the Coalition itself, dating back to the original treaties that founded the Galactic Order over 1,000 years ago. Any species could invoke it against another, and under the binding articles of the Coalition Charter, the challenged species could not refuse without forfeiting its voting seat and all associated trade privileges and military protections. It was a legal weapon disguised as a tradition, and the Valkyrie had used it 11 times over the centuries to establish dominance over every species that dared to threaten their supremacy. The challenge was structured in 3 escalating tiers: single combat between chosen champions, a squad-level tactical engagement, 12 against 12, and a full fleet wargame with live ships and neutral observers. The Valkyrie had never lost a Kael'than. Not one round of one. Not a single bout, or skirmish, or exercise. The 11 species they had challenged were still technically Coalition members, but they existed in the Valkyrie shadow, subordinate in everything that mattered. paying tribute, and bowing their heads, and pretending it was voluntary. Captain Catherine Harlow found me 20 minutes later in the corridor outside the observation deck. She was a compact woman, with sharp gray eyes, and the kind of calm that made you nervous, because you knew it meant she had already calculated the worst possible outcome, and made her peace with it. She told me to follow her to a secure briefing room on the station's inner ring. I did. Inside, we found the human diplomatic attaché, a man named Philip Grant, who wore his anxiety the way some men wear cologne, and a live holographic feed from Admiral Declan Shaw back at Earth Fleet Command. They planned this from the beginning, Grant said before anyone else could sit down. The timing, the public spectacle, the legal framework, the fleet deployment. They have been setting this up since the day our admission was approved. Possibly before. We know, Admiral Shaw said from the holographic display. His voice was even and unhurried, the voice of a man who could tell you the ship was sinking and somehow make you feel like it was part of the plan. We flagged the possibility 8 months ago when our intelligence analysts noticed patterns in Valkyrie diplomatic communications. We have been studying them since before our admission was finalized. Their combat doctrine, their fleet tactics, their training methodologies, their cultural psychology, their decision-making patterns under pressure. We have a comprehensive profile. And what does the profile say? Harlow asked. Shaw paused. It was a brief pause, barely a second, but I noticed it, and I filed it away because Admiral Shaw was not a man who paused accidentally. Everything he did was deliberate. Let them set the terms, he said. Every single one. Do not negotiate. Do not counter-propose. Do not ask for modifications or concessions. Accept whatever structure they demand, whatever arena they choose, whatever rules they set. Accept everything. I expected Harlow to push back. She was not a woman who accepted orders without understanding the reasoning behind them, but she simply nodded, one crisp downward motion of her chin, and I realized that whatever Earth's military leadership had found in their 8 months of study, it had given them a confidence that bordered on something I could not quite identify. It was not arrogance. Arrogance has a smell to it, a heat, a recklessness. This was cold, measured, clinical. The confidence of a surgeon picking up a scalpel, not the confidence of a gambler placing a bet. That evening, the Valkyrie held a rally on the station's arena concourse. Thousands of alien spectators filled the tiered seating, and the Valkyrie performed for them. Ritual war dances that shook the floor with synchronized impacts, hundreds of warriors moving in perfect unison, their forearms weaving patterns that told stories of conquest stretching back centuries. Holographic replays of their most celebrated victories projected on screens the size of buildings, showing Valkyrie fleets shattering enemy formations, Valkyrie warriors cutting down champions of other species, Valkyrie armies marching across conquered worlds while beaten populations watched in silence. A demonstration of close-quarters combat that left scorch marks on the arena floor and the smell of ozone in the recycled air. The crowd watched in silence, and I could feel the weight of it, the unspoken message underneath all the spectacle. This is what we are. This is what you are not. Remember your place in the order of things. Torvon himself appeared at the center of the arena for the finale. He was enormous, even by Valkyrie standards. 8 feet tall, 4 arms thick with corded muscle, his pale skin covered in ritual scarring that marked every major victory of his career. He looked directly at the small cluster of human observers sitting in the upper tiers, and he smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of something that has cornered its prey and wants to enjoy the moment before the kill. The humans, he said, gesturing toward us with 2 of his 4 hands, the way you might gesture toward a stain on the floor. Look at them. A species so young, they still measure their history in thousands of years, instead of hundreds of thousands. A species that has never fought a war beyond the boundaries of their own single world. They sit among us and pretend to belong. After the Kael'than, they will pretend no longer, and then we will petition to have them removed from this coalition entirely, so that no species need suffer their presence again. The crowd murmured. Some species looked at us with pity, others with something that might have been sympathy but smelled more like relief that someone else was about to take the blow. Better us than them. Better the new species absorbed the beating so the established order could remain undisturbed, and everyone could go back to pretending that the Valkyrie were protectors instead of predators. I wanted to be angry. Instead, I felt the cold knot in my stomach that I had carried since the moment Torvald's fleet appeared on the sensors. We were outmatched. Everyone in that arena knew it. The Valkyrie were bigger, stronger, faster, and they had been perfecting the art of combat for 6 centuries. We had been in space for less than 50 years. The math was simple, and the math was brutal, and the math did not lie. The next morning, Earth's chosen representative for the single combat trial arrived at Pinnacle Reach, on a shuttle so small it barely registered on the station's docking sensors. Her name was Sergeant Grace Whitfield, and she was not what anyone expected. She was 5 feet 6 inches tall, lean but not imposing, with short dark hair and the quiet, watchful eyes of someone who has learned to notice everything and react to nothing until the moment demands it. She stepped off the shuttle carrying a single duffel bag, nodded to Harlow with the familiarity of someone who had received her briefing long ago, shook my hand with a grip that was firm but not performative, and asked where she could find something to eat. I walked her to the mess hall. Along the way, we passed a group of Valkyrie officers. They were escorting their own champion to a pre-combat medical evaluation, and the contrast was so stark it felt like a practical joke. The Valkyrie champion's name was Drenok, and he was 7 feet tall, 4-armed, layered with muscle that had been developed through decades of specialized combat training, and decorated with over 100 personal kill marks that covered his arms and chest like a map of violence. He moved like a predator, every step deliberate, every motion radiating controlled and patient violence. When he saw Grace walking beside me in the corridor, he looked down at her, the way you might look at an insect that had wandered onto your dinner plate. Grace did not look up. She kept walking, asked me if the mess hall had coffee, and when I said it had something close, she said that was good enough. Harlow was standing behind us in the corridor. She watched the Valkyrie delegation disappear around the corner. Then she looked at me with an expression I could not read, something between certainty and anticipation, and something darker that lived beneath both. "Watch," she said. Just that one word, and something in her voice made the cold knot in my stomach tighten further, because I realized with sudden and unsettling clarity that she was not worried. She was not worried at all. The arena was filled to capacity. 42,000 spectators from 37 species, packed into tiered seating that rose from the combat floor like the walls of an ancient coliseum. Every major coalition news network was broadcasting live. Diplomatic channels across 14 sectors carried the feed. Betting markets on 6 worlds had opened lines on the fight, and the odds against the human were so steep that most bookmakers were not even accepting wagers. This was not just a fight, it was a political act, a civilizational statement, and every sentient being within range of a receiver understood that what happened on this floor would echo through the halls of power for years. The Valkyrie had chosen the format: open-floor combat, no barriers, no terrain features, no cover. Combatants could select any melee weapon from a standardized armory, or choose to fight unarmed. No energy weapons, no projectiles, no armor plating. The rules were simple: fight until one combatant could not continue or yielded. Killing was permitted, but not required. Drenok entered first. The arena erupted into a roar that shook the transparent viewing barriers. He strode across the floor in full view of every camera, 4 arms spread wide, his kill marks catching the arena lights, and the crowd roared its recognition of a living legend. He was the Valkyrie Dominion's premier champion, undefeated in 31 formal duels across a career that spanned 2 decades. He approached the weapons rack with the casual confidence of a professional, selecting a familiar tool, and chose a curved plasma blade, a traditional Valkyrie weapon that hummed with contained energy along its cutting edge, capable of slicing through reinforced armor. Then he performed a display sequence, a pre-combat ritual that was part religious observance, part intimidation technique, and entirely effective at both. The blade moved through the air in patterns so fast it left glowing trails that lingered in the vision like afterimages of lightning. He spun, slashed, blocked phantom attacks, pivoted on his rear foot, and struck from angles that seemed to defy the geometry of his body. Every motion was perfect. Not good, perfect. The kind of perfection that comes from decades of daily training in a system that has been refined and polished across 6 centuries of unbroken martial tradition. Grace entered from the opposite side of the arena. The roar died. The crowd did not go quiet with respectful anticipation. It went quiet with confusion. She was small. She was plain. She wore simple combat fatigues that hung on her frame without drama. Her expression was the same flat, neutral calm I had seen when she stepped off the shuttle the day before. She approached the weapons rack, studied the options for a moment, with the unhurried attention of someone browsing shelves at a market, and selected a combat knife. A standard, unaugmented, 10-inch combat knife, with no energy enhancement, no special features, no technological advantages of any kind. The Valkyrie commentators, broadcasting in their own language with coalition translation overlay, openly laughed. One of them said something that translated roughly as, "The human appears to have mistaken a battlefield for a kitchen." Grace walked to the center of the arena floor. She held the knife loosely at her side, the blade angled slightly downward, and she looked at nothing in particular. She stretched her neck left and right, rolled her shoulders once, and waited. Drenok took his position opposite her. He towered over her like a monument. He could have reached out with any of his 4 arms and placed his hand on the top of her head without extending fully. The plasma blade hummed in his primary right hand, and the glow from its edge reflected off his scarred skin like firelight dancing on a cave wall. The signal sounded. Drenok attacked. He was fast, faster than something that large and that heavy had any right to be. The plasma blade came in a sweeping horizontal arc aimed at Grace's midsection, and it was followed immediately by a secondary strike from his lower left arm, a crushing back fist designed to catch anyone who dodged the blade by moving in the obvious direction. Grace was not there. She had moved before the blade reached the apex of its arc, a half-step to the right that was so small and so economical, it looked like she had barely shifted her weight. But that half-step placed her precisely outside the weapon's reach, while Drenok's own momentum carried him past her position. She did not counterattack. She did not lunge or stab or take the opening. She simply reset and waited with the knife still held loosely at her side. Drenok recovered instantly. He was too experienced to be frustrated by a single miss. He pivoted, reassessed, and closed the distance again, this time with a combination that used all 4 arms in sequence, the plasma blade leading from the upper right, while his lower right attempted a grab for her shoulder, and his 2 left arms worked in tandem to cut off her escape angles. It was a devastating technique, one I had watched in recordings of Valkyrie combat many times. That particular sequence had ended fights in seconds. It covered every angle. It left no escape. Grace moved through it, like water flowing around stones in a river. She ducked under the first grab, sidestepped the blade by inches, deflected the third arm with her forearm in a motion so economical it barely registered on the observation cameras, and let the fourth arm reach past her without making contact. She did not fight the force. She redirected it. She let Drenok's own power carry his limbs past her, and then she was behind him again, untouched, waiting. 30 seconds into the fight, the pattern became clear to me, even if it was not yet clear to the 42,000 spectators in the stands. Drenok was attacking the way he had been trained to attack. His techniques were flawless. His speed was remarkable. His power was overwhelming. But every attack followed a structure, a logical progression of movements built on 6 centuries of refined Valkyrie doctrine. He was not fighting Grace Whitfield. He was performing a system, executing a program, and Grace was reading it the way a musician reads a familiar piece of music, anticipating each note before it sounded, seeing each movement begin in the shift of his weight before the arm even started to move. At the 45-second mark, she stopped reading and started writing. Drenok launched another combination, and this time Grace did not simply evade. She stepped forward, directly into the attack, inside the arc of the plasma blade, so close to Drenok's body that his weapon became useless, because there was no room to swing it. His lower arms tried to grab her, but she was already moving, driving the heel of her palm into the inner joint of his upper right arm, with a strike that was precise and vicious, and targeted at a weakness in the Valkyrie anatomy that she had clearly studied before she ever set foot on the station. I heard the impact from the observation tier. Drenok's arm buckled. The joint hyperextended with a sound like a branch snapping under weight, and the plasma blade clattered to the floor, its hum dying as it left his grip. He swung with his remaining arms, 3 of them, coming at her from different angles. Grace dropped low, drove her knee into the side of his lower left leg at the joint where the Valkyrie knee structure is least reinforced, and I watched his stance collapse. He stumbled forward, off balance for the first time in the fight, and she came up behind him, locked her arm around his neck, and used his own stumbling weight against him like a lever. 2 of his arms were still functional, and he reached back to tear her loose, but she had already shifted, trapping his upper left arm against his own torso with a leverage hold that turned his size and his multiple limbs into disadvantages instead of advantages, because his arms were getting in each other's way. The fight ended in 2 minutes and 43 seconds. Grace put Drenok on the floor with a final sequence that dislocated 2 of his 4 arms, buckled his right knee, and left her standing over his prone body, with the combat knife resting against the pulse point of his throat. She did not press the blade into his skin. She did not need to. The position was absolute. He could not move without cutting himself, and they both knew it. She stepped back. She lowered the knife. She waited. The arena was silent. 42,000 beings from 37 species sat in absolute stillness, processing what they had just witnessed. The Valkyrie commentators had stopped talking. Their feeds showed empty chairs and abandoned microphones. The diplomatic observation feeds showed delegates from a dozen species leaning forward in their seats, with expressions that ranged from open-mouthed shock to something I could only describe as rapid, frantic recalculation of everything they had assumed about the order of the galaxy. Drenok rose slowly. His 2 injured arms hung at his sides like dead weight, and his face was a mask of something I had never seen on a Valkyrie before. It was not anger. It was not humiliation. It was incomprehension. Pure, undiluted incomprehension. He did not understand what had happened to him, because what had happened to him did not exist within the framework of everything he had ever been taught about combat, about strength, about what it meant to be the greatest warrior species in the known galaxy. The Valkyrie reframed it within the hour. Torvon appeared on a public broadcast and dismissed the result with practiced contempt. Drenok had been unprepared, he said. The human had fought without honor, using deception and trickery instead of true warrior skill. A single combat result meant nothing when it was achieved through cowardice rather than strength. The real test would come in the squad engagement, where trickery could not save one fighter from the coordinated discipline of the Valkyrie's finest unit. But behind the public posture, the damage was deep and real. I learned from a coalition intelligence contact, a Melkari analyst named Soren who had been tracking Valkyrie internal communications for years, that their leadership was in private turmoil. They had never lost a Kael'than single combat, not once in 600 years of galactic dominance. Their intelligence division was tearing apart the footage of the fight frame by frame, analyzing every movement, every angle, every decision Grace had made, trying to understand how a creature, half Drenok's size and with half his number of limbs, had systematically dismantled their greatest champion in under 3 minutes using a kitchen knife. The squad engagement was scheduled for the following day. Torvon demanded it be accelerated, pushed forward from the original 3-day preparation interval. He wanted the embarrassment of the single combat buried beneath a decisive squad-level victory, and he chose his finest unit to deliver it. The Oath Guard, 12 elite Valkyrie warriors who served as the Supreme Commander's personal combat unit, hand-selected from across the entire Dominion, trained together for decades, honed into the most lethal small unit fighting force the galaxy had ever produced. They had completed 47 engagements across their career without a single loss. 47. Not one defeat, not one draw, not one engagement where their superiority was even questionable. The humans sent 12 soldiers, whose names I did not learn until after it was over. They arrived at the staging area in standard combat fatigues, with no rank insignia, no decorations, no visible indicators of their experience or qualifications. They were quiet, professional, and they spent the hours before the engagement doing something that completely baffled the Valkyrie observers who were watching them on the preparation feeds. They talked. They sat in a loose circle on the staging floor and they talked, trading ideas, sketching diagrams on portable screens, debating approaches, laughing occasionally at jokes I could not hear from the observation feed. They did not drill. They did not perform weapons checks in formal sequence. They did not pray or meditate or perform pre-combat rituals. They just talked, the way colleagues might talk before a complex project at work. The Valkyrie Oath Guard, by contrast, performed 2 hours of synchronized combat drills on their staging floor, each warrior moving in perfect coordination with the others, their weapons handling so precise and so rehearsed that it looked like choreography. They were impressive. They were terrifying. They were a machine built for a single purpose and polished to a mirror finish. The engagement took place inside a decommissioned station module that had been converted into a simulated urban combat environment. 3 levels of corridors, rooms, intersections, and open spaces, all rigged with sensors and observation cameras that covered every square meter. Both teams were equipped with full combat gear and stun weapons, calibrated to incapacitate on contact. The rules were straightforward. Eliminate the opposing team. Last team standing wins. I was given access to the observation feed alongside coalition military attachés from 9 species. We watched on a bank of screens that showed every angle, every corridor, every room in the module. The Oath Guard entered from the south airlock. Their formation was a thing of beauty. Textbook Valkyrie combined arms movement, perfectly coordinated fields of fire, overlapping coverage zones, sequential room clearing, with the kind of precision that only comes from years of daily training together. They moved through the module like a single organism, every soldier exactly where they should be, every angle covered, every shadow checked, every doorway cleared by the numbers. It was the most impressive small unit tactical movement I had ever witnessed, and I had spent years studying military operations. The humans entered from the north airlock, and then they vanished. For 3 minutes, the Oath Guard found nothing. They advanced through empty corridors and cleared vacant rooms. Their formation held. Their discipline did not waver. But I could see something building in their movements, a tension in the way they double-checked corners they had already cleared, a sharpness in the way they swept rooms that were obviously empty, a growing awareness that they were moving through a space that should have contained enemies and did not. They were trained to fight enemies who formed up, took positions, and fought. They were not trained for ghosts. At the 3-minute and 12-second mark, the humans struck. They came from everywhere at once, and the observation room went mad. 2 dropped from ventilation shafts directly into the center of the Valkyrie formation, emerging from spaces that no Valkyrie would have thought to check, because no Valkyrie could have fit inside them. 3 emerged from beneath floor grading panels that the Oath Guard had walked directly over, without inspecting, because who would lie in the dust and the dark beneath the floor for 3 minutes, waiting for the enemy to step on top of them? 2 more breached sealed doors from behind, doors the Oath Guard had cleared and dismissed as secure minutes earlier. The remaining 5 hit from angles that exploited the formation's blind spots, angles that should not have existed because the formation was specifically designed to eliminate blind spots. It lasted 90 seconds. 12 Oath Guard, the most celebrated squad in 600 years of Valkyrie military history, neutralized in 90 seconds. Not a single human was hit. Not one. Not grazed, not tagged, not even targeted successfully. The observation room was quiet for a long time after the feeds showed the final Oath Guard member go down. The Korvathi military attaché, a massive figure covered in natural armor plating, turned to his aide and said something in a low voice that the translator picked up, despite his obvious efforts at discretion. "They do not fight like soldiers," he said. "They fight like something that has been hunted for so long it learned to become the hunter." I looked at the replay on my screen. I watched the moment the humans emerged from their hiding positions, and I saw something in their movements that I recognized because I had trained alongside soldiers like them during my years at the Fleet Academy. They were not following a doctrine. They were not executing a rehearsed plan. Each one was making independent decisions in real time, reading the situation, adapting to what they saw, trusting the others to adapt as well, without needing to communicate. There was no formation, because they did not need a formation. They had something older and more flexible than any formation. They had instinct, the accumulated survival instinct of a species that had spent 10,000 years fighting things that wanted to kill them, refined and sharpened and passed down through generations, until it was as natural as breathing. Torvald watched the replay in silence. I saw him on the command observation feed, standing motionless before a screen on the station's upper level, his forearms hanging at his sides. The arena outside was in chaos. 42,000 spectators were trying to process 2 consecutive Valkyrie defeats. Alien diplomats were clustering in corridors, whispering urgently. The political calculus of the entire coalition was shifting in real time, and everyone could feel the ground moving beneath their feet. The fleet wargame was next, the final tier of the Kael'than. And for the first time in my military career, I did not feel the clean, simple fear of facing a superior enemy. I felt something stranger and more unsettling. I felt the cold awareness of what my own species was capable of when it decided to stop being polite and start proving a point. I had watched Grace dismantle a warrior twice her size, not with strength or speed, but with understanding. I had watched 12 soldiers erase the Valkyrie's greatest squad, not with superior firepower, but with the accumulated survival instincts of a species that had spent millennia learning to fight dirty, think fast, and survive against things that were bigger and stronger and meaner than they were. The fleet wargame was in 3 days. We were going to fight with ships instead of fists, and the Valkyrie had 60 warships to our 15. The math said we would lose. But the math had not mattered in the arena. The math had not mattered in the station module. And standing in that observation room, watching Torvald stare at a replay he could not comprehend, I was beginning to understand with absolute certainty that the math was never going to matter at all. 3 days of preparation aboard the Gallipoli. 3 days of drills, briefings, and a kind of quiet intensity that settled over the crew like a low-pressure weather system descending on a coastline. I had served on warships before, including 2 years aboard the cruiser Endeavour during the border patrol rotations, but I had never experienced anything like the atmosphere aboard that ship in the days leading up to the fleet wargame. It was not tension. Tension implies uncertainty, the vibrating wire of not knowing what comes next. This was focus. Pure, concentrated, almost meditative focus. The entire crew of 216 souls moved through their duties, with a precision that was not mechanical but organic, the way a wolf pack moves when it has caught the scent and knows the hunt is coming. Captain Harlow ran drills around the clock, rotating the crew through 4-hour watches, so that every station was manned and every system was tested. But the drills were not the standard fleet exercises I was accustomed to. Every drill began with something going wrong. Sensors failing at the worst possible moment. Weapons systems glitching during a simulated firing run. Navigation errors that threw us off course mid-maneuver. Communication blackouts that cut us off from the rest of the task force without warning. The crew was not being trained to execute a plan perfectly. They were being trained to function when every plan had fallen apart, and the only resources left were their own judgment and each other. I asked Harlow about it on the second night. We were standing on the bridge during a quiet watch, while the rest of the crew rotated through their sleep cycles. The stars outside the viewport were steady and indifferent, and the only sound was the low hum of the ship's life support systems cycling air through the compartments. Why train for failure? I asked. Every other navy in the coalition trains for perfection. The Valkyrie spend years perfecting their formations until there are 0 errors. That is exactly why they lose, she said. She looked at me with those gray eyes, and there was something in them that was not unkind, but was not gentle either. It was patience. The patience of a teacher who knows the student will understand eventually. Perfection is brittle, Commander. It works until the first thing goes wrong, and then it shatters. We do not train for perfection, because perfection does not exist in combat. Combat is chaos. The species that wins is the species that thrives in chaos. She did not elaborate further, and I did not push, because I was beginning to understand her well enough to know that she did not waste words on explanations that experience would make obvious soon enough. The wargame rules were set by mutual agreement and overseen by neutral coalition observers, drawn from 7 species with no stake in the outcome. The battle space was a dense asteroid field on the outer edge of the Pinnacle Reach system, a chaotic volume of tumbling rock and ice that stretched across 300,000 cubic kilometers of navigational nightmare. The Valkyrie had chosen it because their fleet excelled in coordinated formation, flying through complex environments. It was their home terrain, their specialty, their arena. Weapons were simulated. Each ship carried advanced targeting systems that could lock onto an opponent and register a confirmed hit through the Coalition Observer Network. A ship tagged by a confirmed lock from a weapons range position was ruled destroyed and required to withdraw from the engagement zone immediately. No live weapons. No actual combat. No risk to life. The goal was tactical superiority, not destruction. The goal was proving who would have won if the weapons were real. 15 human ships against 60 Valkyrie warships. The Gallipoli was a heavy cruiser, the largest vessel in our small task force. The rest were a mixed bag of frigates, destroyers, and corvettes, some of them so new their hull plating still smelled like the shipyard. The Valkyrie fleet included 4 heavy battlecruisers, each one 3 times the mass of the Gallipoli, supported by a full tactical screen of escorts, interceptors, electronic warfare frigates, and fleet tenders. By every conventional military metric, the outcome was predetermined. The coalition observers had privately assigned the humans a 4% probability of victory. On the morning of the war game, Harlow gathered the senior officers in the tactical center. She stood before the holographic display of the asteroid field, a 3-dimensional maze of spinning rock and gravitational eddies rendered in blue light, and she delivered the shortest tactical briefing of my career. The Valkyrie will enter in Thorn formation, she said. 3 layers. Outer screen of interceptors for early detection and harassment. Middle ring of destroyers and cruisers for sustained engagement. Inner core of battlecruisers for decisive firepower. It is the finest tactical formation in known space. Every military academy in the coalition teaches it as the gold standard of fleet coordination. It covers every vector of approach, provides layered fields of fire, and allows coordinated response to threats from any direction. It has crushed every fleet that has ever faced it. She paused. She looked at each of us in turn, making eye contact, holding it for a heartbeat, moving on. We are not going to face it, she said. We are going to make it irrelevant. She outlined our approach in 3 sentences. The task force would scatter upon entering the asteroid field. Every ship would operate independently, using passive sensors only, maintaining strict communication silence. There was no formation. There was no coordinated attack plan. There was no sequence of pre-planned maneuvers. There was a single guiding principle, and she stated it with the calm certainty of someone reciting a fundamental law of the universe. Make them fight 15 different wars at the same time. The war game began at noon, local station time. The Valkyrie fleet entered the asteroid field from the galactic north in perfect Thorn formation, and it was magnificent. I will not pretend otherwise. 60 warships moving as a single organism through a field of tumbling rock, navigating the chaos with mathematical precision, each vessel maintaining its exact position relative to every other vessel, while dodging asteroids that could crush them, sensors sweeping in coordinated patterns that left no blind spots and no shadows unchecked. Coalition military observers would later describe it as the most impressive display of fleet coordination ever witnessed by non-Valkyrie eyes. The human task force entered from the galactic south, 15 ships in loose formation. And then, as if someone had thrown a switch, we went dark. The Gallipoli killed its active sensors, cut external communications, reduced engine output to minimum stealth levels, and slipped behind a tumbling asteroid the size of a small moon. Across the field, 14 other human ships did the same thing simultaneously. Within 40 seconds of entering the engagement zone, we had ceased to exist on every sensor display in the system. The coalition observers lost track of us. The Valkyrie lost track of us. For all practical purposes, 15 ships and their crews had simply vanished into the rock and the dark. The Valkyrie pursued. Of course they pursued. That was what the Thorn formation was designed to do. Their formation adjusted, spreading slightly to cover a wider volume of search space, and they advanced into the asteroid field with the supreme confidence of a species that had been doing this for 600 years and had never once encountered anything in the void that they could not find, corner, and destroy. Their sensors were among the most powerful in the galaxy. Their crews were the most disciplined. They outnumbered us 4-1. They expected to find us. They expected to corner us. They expected this to be quick and decisive and humiliating. They were wrong. I sat at my tactical console aboard the Gallipoli, watching data feed in from the ship's passive sensor array. Passive sensors are limited. They cannot reach out and actively probe the void the way active systems can. They can only listen, absorbing the faint signals that bounce and bleed and reflect through the chaos of an asteroid field. Thermal echoes, engine vibrations transmitted through rock, the electromagnetic whisper of encrypted communications leaking through imperfect shielding. Passive sensors are quiet and patient, and they require a different kind of skill to interpret than active scans. I could feel the Valkyrie fleet moving through the field, the way you can feel a storm approaching from the horizon. The vibration of their engines transmitted through the asteroid we were hiding behind. The heat signatures of their reactors reflecting off distant surfaces in patterns that told me speed, heading, formation density. The electromagnetic whisper of their communications. Encrypted, but not silent. Never silent, because they had never needed to be silent. No one had ever made them need it. The first ambush happened 11 minutes into the wargame. A human corvette, the Blackthorn, had positioned itself inside a hollow asteroid, using the rock itself as a natural sensor blind. The crew had found the hollow through geological scans during the preparation period, and had maneuvered inside it the night before, sitting in the dark for hours, waiting. When 3 Valkyrie interceptors passed within engagement range, the Blackthorn emerged from the asteroid like a predator lunging from a cave, tagged all 3 with targeting locks in a 6-second burst, and vanished back into the field before the Valkyrie formation could orient and respond. 3 kills, 0 losses. Elapsed time from emergence to disappearance, 14 seconds. The Valkyrie adapted. They tightened their formation, pulling the outer interceptor screen closer to the middle ring, reducing the gaps and the isolated patrols that the Blackthorn had exploited. It was the textbook response, the correct response, the response that any competent fleet commander would make. It was also exactly what Harlow had predicted they would do. With the formation compressed, the human destroyers went to work. 2 of them, the Harrier and the Kestrel, had positioned themselves on opposite sides of a narrow passage between 2 massive asteroids that the compressed Valkyrie formation would need to traverse. When the formation funneled through the passage, both destroyers struck simultaneously from perpendicular angles, catching the Valkyrie in a crossfire that their compressed formation could not respond to without either breaking apart or exposing the inner core. They chose to hold formation. It cost them 8 more ships, tagged and ruled destroyed, before the destroyers vanished into the rocks like smoke dissipating in wind. The Valkyrie adapted again. They broke their fleet into hunting groups of 5 to 10 ships, each one sweeping a sector of the asteroid field independently, trying to flush the human ships out of hiding with numbers and coverage. It was a departure from their doctrine, an improvisation forced by circumstances they had never trained for, and it cost them their greatest single advantage. The Thorn formation was designed to function as a unified whole. Broken into fragments, it lost its layered defense, its overlapping fields of fire, its coordinated response capability. Each fragment was powerful, each fragment was disciplined, but each fragment was alone. The human ships picked them apart, one by one, group by group, ambush after ambush after ambush. I fed data to Harlow as fast as my console could process it. Thermal signatures here. Engine vibrations there. A communication burst that revealed the position of a Valkyrie destroyer group 3 minutes before they entered our engagement zone. The Drathani sensor buoy network gave us real-time tracking on 40% of the Valkyrie fleet at any given moment. Intelligence the Valkyrie did not know we had. Harlow absorbed every piece of information I gave her, made decisions in seconds, and issued orders with a calm that bordered on something almost inhuman in its steadiness. 40 minutes into the wargame, the Valkyrie had lost 27 ships. The humans had lost 2. A corvette and a frigate, caught by a Valkyrie hunting group that had gotten lucky with an active sensor sweep. Then they found us. 3 Valkyrie destroyers emerged from behind an asteroid cluster directly ahead of the Gallipoli, close enough that I could see their hull markings on the visual display. They had targeting locks before I could shout the warning. Red lights flooded my console. 3 confirmed tracking solutions, all converging on our position, all weapons range. In 4 seconds, we would be tagged, the Gallipoli would be ruled destroyed, and our heaviest ship would be out of the fight. Harlow did not hesitate. She did not raise her voice. She did not show a flicker of surprise or concern. Helm, full burn directly at the lead vessel. Roll 30 degrees starboard on my mark. Countermeasures on my mark. I felt the engines surge beneath me. The Gallipoli leaped forward, accelerating directly at the lead Valkyrie destroyer on a collision trajectory. My stomach dropped. My vision narrowed. We were charging 3 enemy ships that already had weapons locks on us. It was the most insane tactical decision I had ever witnessed from a commanding officer. Mark. The ship rolled. Countermeasures erupted from the hull in a burst of electronic noise and thermal decoys, scrambling the Valkyrie targeting systems for exactly the number of seconds that Harlow needed, and not 1 second more. The Gallipoli passed so close to the lead Valkyrie destroyer that I could see the individual sensor arrays mounted on its hull through the viewport. Close enough to read the kill marks etched into the white armor plating. Close enough that for one frozen, crystalline instant, I locked eyes with a Valkyrie officer staring out of their bridge viewport at us, and I saw raw, undiluted disbelief on his face. In that pass, our targeting systems tagged all 3 destroyers, point-blank range, impossible to miss, impossible to evade. We cleared the engagement zone with our hull intact, and our hearts trying to beat their way through our rib cages. I looked at Harlow. She was smiling, not broadly, not triumphantly. A small, tight, precise smile that said she had known exactly how far she could push the math and had pushed it to within inches of the breaking point, and not 1 inch further. The war game ended 71 minutes after it began. All 60 Valkyrie ships were tagged, destroyed, by the rules of the engagement. Every single one. The human task force had lost 4 of 15. Torvon's flagship, a massive battlecruiser bristling with weapons systems and decorated with the accumulated kill marks of 100 victories across 3 centuries, was the last ship tagged. The vessel that tagged it was a human frigate called the Wren, 1/5 the flagship's tonnage, crewed by 84 people who had spent the entire wargame sitting silently behind a dark asteroid, engines cold, systems powered down to minimal life support, waiting with the patience of a species that had learned to ambush predators in tall grass, 100,000 years before it learned to build a fire. The aftermath was unlike anything I had witnessed in my career. The arena broadcast had been watched by an estimated 4 billion beings across coalition space. The political reverberations were immediate, seismic, and irreversible. Alien diplomats, military commanders, intelligence analysts, and trade negotiators, who had politely ignored humanity for 11 months, were suddenly desperate to speak with anyone wearing a United Earth uniform. I was approached 6 times in the corridor between the docking bay and my quarters by representatives of species I had never exchanged a word with. Cooperation agreements, intelligence sharing proposals, joint training invitations, and trade partnerships were offered with an urgency that bordered on panic. The galaxy had woken up, and it was scrambling to understand what it had just seen. The Valkyrie delegation was absent from the post-war game reception. Their ships remained in formation at the edge of the system, running lights dimmed, communications silent. Torvon had not spoken publicly since the war game ended. That evening, I attended a classified intelligence briefing aboard the Gallipoli. Our intelligence team had been monitoring Valkyrie internal communications since before the fleet engagement using intercepts provided by the Melkari, and the picture they painted was worse than anything I had imagined. The Valkyrie Dominion was not simply embarrassed. Their entire societal structure was beginning to fracture along fault lines that had been invisible for centuries, because no force had ever been strong enough to expose them. For 600 years, the Valkyrie claim to martial supremacy had been the foundation of everything their civilization was built upon. Their government derived its legitimacy from military dominance. Their economy depended on tribute payments from vassal species and preferential trade agreements enforced by the implicit threat of Valkyrie military power. Their territorial holdings, their diplomatic weight, their cultural identity, their religion, their art, their education system, all of it rested on a single foundational proposition. We are the greatest warriors in the galaxy. No one can defeat us. No one ever has. No one ever will. In the span of 3 days, a species that had been in the coalition for 11 months had destroyed that proposition in front of 4 billion witnesses. Intelligence reports were already flooding in. 3 Valkyrie vassal worlds had filed formal challenges to their subjugation treaties within hours of the wargame's conclusion, citing the Kael'than precedent. If the Valkyrie could be beaten, then the treaties built on their invincibility were legally void. Coalition legal scholars were scrambling to review the implications. Military analysts across a dozen species were rewriting their threat assessments, their alliance strategies, their entire understanding of the galactic balance of power. The political order that had held stable for centuries was shifting beneath everyone's feet, and no one knew where the ground would finally settle. At the end of the briefing, Harlow showed us Admiral Shaw's latest communication. It was short. 1 word. Transmitted on a priority channel. Stand by. I sat in the tactical center after the others had left, staring at the star map and the cluster of Valkyrie warships holding position at the edge of the system. 300 ships. Silent, dark, waiting. And somewhere aboard that flagship, a supreme commander who had never known defeat in his entire career was making a decision that would determine whether this remained a political embarrassment or became something far, far worse. The word standby told me that Admiral Shaw had already run his own calculations on which way Torvon would go, and the result had not made him comfortable. The Valkyrie Dominion began to fracture on the morning of the 4th day. I watched the intelligence reports come in aboard the Gallipoli, each one worse than the last, each one revealing another crack in a structure that had looked invulnerable just a week ago. 3 vassal worlds had filed legal challenges within hours of the wargame. By noon, the number was 7. The Draconi Confederation, a species the Valkyrie had defeated in a Kael'than 60 years ago and had been extracting tribute from ever since, announced it would no longer honor its tributary obligations. The Korvathi Trade Alliance, which had been paying preferential tariffs to Valkyrie merchants for decades, under the implicit threat of military retaliation, suspended all payments pending coalition legal review. On 2 Valkyrie colony worlds, civil unrest had escalated from scattered protests to full-scale riots. Their political opposition, a reform movement that had been crushed and silenced and pushed underground for generations, was finding its voice in the chaos and discovering that the population was willing to listen for the first time in living memory. 600 years of dominance, unraveling in less than a week. And the cause was not a war, not an invasion, not a catastrophic military defeat that left their cities burning. The cause was 3 controlled demonstrations performed in front of cameras, a fistfight, a squad exercise, and a tactical game. The weapons were simulated, the casualties were 0, and the damage was total. I found Grace Whitfield in the station's medical wing on the afternoon of the 4th day. She was having the deep bruises on her forearms treated. Drennick had not landed a clean hit during their fight, but the deflections and redirections she had used to neutralize his strikes had left dark, mottled contusions across both arms from wrist to elbow. She sat on the examination table, quietly enduring the treatment, and she did not look like someone who had changed the political landscape of the galaxy. She looked tired. "How does it feel?" I asked, standing in the doorway. She looked at me. "How does what feel?" "All of this. You beat their greatest champion in front of 4 billion viewers. You triggered a chain reaction that is tearing their civilization apart at the seams." She was quiet for a moment. The medical technician finished with her left arm and moved to the right. Grace flexed the fingers of her treated hand slowly, testing the range of motion, assessing the damage with the clinical detachment of someone who has been injured before and knows the process. "I served in 3 conflicts on Earth before I was assigned to this," she said. "Real conflicts, not demonstrations, not rituals. The kind where the person standing across from you is not trying to score points or prove their honor or demonstrate their cultural superiority. They are trying to end your life, and you are trying to end theirs. And the only rule is that whoever is still breathing at the end gets to keep doing it." She paused. "The Valkyrie are not warriors, Commander. They are athletes. They have turned combat into a sport, a spectacle, a competition with rules and judges and points, because no one has ever made them pay the real price of fighting. I did not step into that arena to humiliate Drennock. I fought him to show him the difference between a performance and a fight. Whether he understood the lesson is not something I can control. I carried those words with me for the next 12 hours, turning them over in my mind the way you worry at a loose tooth, because there was a truth in them that I was not ready to fully confront. We had spent so much time measuring ourselves against the Valkyrie on their terms, comparing their strength to our strength, their speed to our speed, their centuries of martial tradition to our decades of space travel, that we had missed the fundamental asymmetry at the heart of the entire situation. The Valkyrie had been preparing for contests. Structured, rule-bound, predictable contests. Humanity had been preparing for survival. And survival does not care about rules, or honor, or formations, or traditions, or centuries of refined technique. Survival cares about one thing, and one thing only: being alive when it is over. Torvald broke his silence at midnight on the 5th day. His broadcast hit every open channel on Pinnacle Reach and rippled outward across Coalition space at the speed of light. He did not appear in formal dress or ceremonial armor. He stood on the bridge of his flagship in full battle gear, 4 arms rigid at his sides, and his face was the face of a being who had been backed into the deepest corner of his existence and chosen the only response his culture and his pride allowed. The Kael'than is void, he declared, his voice vibrating with controlled fury. The results are illegitimate. The humans did not fight with honor. They used deception, concealment, misdirection, and cowardice in place of true warrior skill. The Valkyrie Dominion does not accept these outcomes, and we do not recognize the political consequences that lesser species have drawn from them. He paused. The transmission showed the bridge crew behind him, standing at their stations, faces set in grim determination. The Valkyrie Dominion withdraws from the Galactic Coalition, effective immediately. We will demonstrate our supremacy, not through games and rituals, but through the only language that the galaxy truly respects. Force, the human colony world designated New Carthage, will serve as the stage for this demonstration. We will reduce its defenses, we will scatter its protectors, and we will remind every species in this galaxy that the Valkyrie do not lose. He cut the transmission without waiting for a response. Panic erupted across Coalition space. Pinnacle Reach became a hive of frantic diplomatic activity. Coalition ambassadors rushed to emergency sessions. Military attaches flooded communication channels with requests for information, guidance, and assurances that someone, somewhere, had a plan to prevent open war. Most species urged humanity to negotiate, to concede, to offer some face-saving concession that would allow Torvald to stand down without admitting defeat. The Melhari delegate pulled me aside in a corridor and told me directly that his government was prepared to help broker a formal human apology if it would prevent bloodshed. He was sincere. He was terrified. The math was staggering. The Valkyrie Dominion maintained a standing fleet of over 2,000 combat-capable warships, with reserves and auxiliary vessels pushing the total even higher. Humanity's entire navy numbered 312 vessels across all classes. New Carthage was a colony world with a population of 400,000 civilians, including families with children, and a defensive garrison of exactly 8 ships. If the Valkyrie committed even a significant fraction of their fleet, the numbers were not just unfavorable, they were impossible. I expected fear aboard the Gallipoli. I expected the grim, tight-lipped anxiety of sailors who have done the math and know the answer. Instead, I found something that disturbed me more deeply than fear ever could have. I found readiness. Not the bright, eager readiness of soldiers who believe they are going to win and are excited about it. The dark, settled, immovable readiness of people who have decided that the outcome does not change the obligation, and that the cost of defending their own is a cost they are willing to pay, regardless of the receipt. Harlow gathered the crew. She stood in the ship's main corridor, visible to every compartment through the internal communications feed, and she delivered a briefing that lasted less than 2 minutes. Every word mattered. The Valkyrie have declared their intent to attack a human civilian world, she said. New Carthage, 400,000 people. Families, children, people who went to sleep last night believing that the navy they pay for and the government they elected would stand between them and anything that came out of the dark. The Valkyrie have told us they will scatter our defenders and reduce the colony to rubble, to prove that they are still the strongest species in the galaxy. She let that settle. I watched the faces of the crew around me. They were young, most of them, younger than me. Some of them had joined the Navy because they wanted to explore the stars and see things no human had seen before. Some of them had joined because they believed in something larger than themselves. None of them had signed up to die in a battle they could not win against a fleet that outnumbered them 7-1. But none of them looked away. Not one of them. There will be no negotiation, Harlow continued. There will be no apology. There will be no concession. This is what our species has been doing for 10,000 years. Every time something bigger and stronger and meaner than us decided we were easy prey, we showed it the price. We did not always win, but we always made them wish they had chosen someone else. She paused one final time. The silence on the ship was absolute. The fleet is mobilizing. Every ship, every station, every reserve vessel capable of reaching the system in time. We sail for New Carthage in 6 hours. The human fleet assembled in the New Carthage system over the following 32 hours. 312 ships arriving in waves from staging points across human space, each wave dropping out of faster-than-light travel and adding its signatures to the growing formation on the tactical display. I watched them gather from my console, counting each new arrival, the way you count the members of your family before a storm hits. 312 ships. Against an expected 2,000, outnumbered roughly 7-1. The coalition observers arrived as well, positioning their monitoring vessels at the system's edge, far from the projected combat zone. A dozen species sent ships. They were there to watch. Most of them, I suspected, expected to document our destruction for the historical record. But quiet things were happening beneath the visible surface. A Melkari intelligence frigate docked with the Gallipoli under cover of a routine supply transfer and delivered a data package containing the complete encryption schema for Valkyrie fleet communications, allowing us to read their tactical coordination in real time. The Korvathi Trade Alliance, through back-channel diplomatic contacts that would never appear in any official record, provided detailed technical specifications for the Valkyrie warship's shield harmonics, including the specific frequencies and modulation patterns that their defensive systems were least effective against. The Drathani Confederation, who had suffered under Valkyrie dominance for decades and had been secretly preparing for the day that dominance ended, transmitted a real-time sensor feed of Valkyrie fleet movements from a network of hidden surveillance buoys they had maintained along Valkyrie borders for exactly this contingency. The galaxy was not coming to rescue us. No species was willing to commit military forces against the Valkyrie in open combat, but they were feeding us every advantage they could provide, quietly, deniably, through channels that could be disavowed, because they wanted us to win. They wanted someone to break the Valkyrie hold on the galaxy's throat, and they were willing to help from the shadows, as long as their fingerprints were not on the weapon. The Valkyrie fleet arrived at the edge of the New Carthage system, at dawn on the 7th day since the Kael'than began. 2,000 warships, the largest Valkyrie fleet deployment in 300 years, drawn from garrisons and patrol routes across their entire territory. They emerged from faster-than-light travel in waves, each wave falling into thorn formation with the mechanical precision that had terrified the galaxy for 6 centuries. The formation filled the tactical display from edge to edge, a wall of warships so dense it looked almost solid, and the sight of it on my screens made something in my chest go tight and still. Torvon broadcast one final message across all frequencies. His voice was cold and flat and final. No games, no simulations, no rituals. Your species ends here. I sat at my console, data streaming across my screens, and I watched the human fleet begin to move. 312 ships against 2,000. The math was clear. The math was impossible. The math said we should surrender or run. The math had never understood what we were. Harlow gave the order, and the fleet advanced. Not scattering, not hiding. Advancing in a formation that no coalition species had ever seen before. A formation designed not in a military academy or a tactical simulator, but in the gut instinct of a species that had been backed against the wall more times than it could count, and had learned that the wall was just something to push off from. I felt the rumble of the engines through the deck plating as the Gallipoli surged forward, and somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the fear and the adrenaline and the cold awareness that these might be the last hours of my life, something ancient and fierce and absolutely unbreakable uncurled itself and bared its teeth. The Valkyrie opened with everything they had. 2,000 warships fired simultaneously, and the space between our fleets turned white. Torpedoes by the thousands. Energy volleys in concentrations so dense they overloaded our sensor displays and turned the tactical screens into walls of static. The void itself seemed to scream as that wave of destruction crossed the gap toward our 300 ships, and I gripped the edge of my console and watched it come with the detached clarity that descends on you when the time for fear has passed, and the only thing left is the next breath, and the next decision, and the job you are trained to do. "Execute Cannae," Harlow said. The human fleet split, not randomly, not in panic, 3 groups peeling apart in 3 different directions, with the precise, practiced coordination of a maneuver that had been planned, modeled, simulated, and rehearsed in the months since Admiral Shaw's intelligence division first identified the probability that the Valkyrie would escalate from ritual to war. The name was deliberate, Cannae, the ancient battle where Hannibal Barca let the Romans drive forward into what they believed was a collapsing defensive line, then closed his forces around them from both flanks and annihilated a numerically superior army. Over 2,000 years later, on the other side of the galaxy, we were still reaching into our own bloody history for the tools to survive. The Valkyrie opening salvo passed through the space our fleet had occupied 3 seconds earlier. The majority of it struck nothing but empty vacuum and the tumbling debris of asteroids at the system's edge. A handful of tracking torpedoes adjusted course and found targets. I saw 2 human corvettes disappear from the tactical display in the first 30 seconds of the battle. 2 ships, 2 crews, roughly 160 people, gone, in the time it takes to draw a breath. The 3 human groups curved outward and then inward, tracing arcs through the void that brought them sweeping toward the flanks and rear of the Valkyrie formation, from 3 different angles of approach. The Thorn formation was designed to face a threat from one direction. It was the most powerful single-axis combat formation in the galaxy. It was not designed for what we were doing. The Valkyrie had expected us to either stand in place and absorb their opening salvo like every other species they had fought, or scatter in retreat to be hunted down in fragments. They had not considered the possibility that we would split into 3 coordinated groups and close from 3 vectors simultaneously, because no species with 300 ships would voluntarily divide its forces against a fleet of 2,000, unless that species understood something about combat that the Valkyrie did not. Torvon recognized the danger. I will give him that credit. He was a warrior of enormous experience, decades of command, and he saw the shape of the trap forming around his fleet within seconds of our maneuver. He ordered the Thorn to pivot, reorienting the formation to face the largest of the 3 human groups, while dispatching screening forces to intercept the other 2. It was the correct tactical response. It was what any experienced fleet commander would have done in his position. It was also too slow. The human ships were faster, not by a dramatic margin, not by the kind of overwhelming speed advantage that decides battles on its own, but faster by just enough to matter. Our engines were smaller, but our ships were lighter, and the United Earth Navy had been building warships for 50 years under a design philosophy that prioritized maneuverability and speed above all other considerations, because we had always known, at some level, that we would be outgunned and outnumbered in any fight that mattered. The Valkyrie built their warships for raw power, for devastating firepower and impenetrable shields. We built ours for survival. And survival meant being able to choose when, where, and on what terms you fought. The first human group, led by a destroyer squadron under a commander named Patrick Hale, struck the Valkyrie right flank before the screening force Torvon had dispatched could fully deploy to intercept. Hale's ships came in fast and close, driving inside the effective range of the Valkyrie heavy weapons, where the engagement became a knife fight instead of an artillery duel. At point-blank range, our weapon systems proved something that the wargame had only hinted at. The targeting locks we had used in the wargame were a fraction of what we carried. The real weapons, the ones designed for real combat, were devastating at close range. The Valkyrie had spent centuries perfecting long-range precision fire, because no enemy had ever been reckless or fast enough to close to point-blank distance. Their ships were not optimized for close combat. Their shields were designed to deflect focused energy beams at range, not to absorb the brutal, concentrated kinetic impacts that Hale's destroyers delivered from distances so close the gunners could have thrown rocks and hit their targets. The second group struck the Valkyrie left flank 60 seconds later. The timing was not coincidental. It was calculated precisely to prevent the Valkyrie from reinforcing one flank without fatally exposing the other. The Valkyrie fleet, designed to operate as a unified formation where every element supported every other element, was being forced to fight in disconnected fragments, responding to threats from multiple directions, with elements that could not coordinate because the formation had been broken and the communication channels were overloaded, and the enemy was inside their decision loop. The Gallipoli was part of the third group, the one Harlow commanded personally. We came in from above the Valkyrie formation's plane, diving through a gap in their upper screen that existed for exactly 4 seconds before the Valkyrie destroyers repositioned to close it. 4 seconds. The window of opportunity was 4 seconds wide. Harlow threaded our entire attack group through it, without losing a single ship. The battle became a nightmare, not the clean, precise nightmare of a simulation or a war game, the real kind. The kind where the ship shudders under impacts that you feel in your teeth and your spine. The kind where the lights flicker and the damage reports cascade in faster than you can process them, and the air tastes like burned insulation and ozone and fear. I fed targeting data to Harlow as fast as my console could generate it, prioritizing threats, identifying weaknesses in the Valkyrie ship's shield coverage, tracking the movements of enemy vessels through the chaos, doing the job I was trained to do while the ship shook, and the alarms screamed, and the people around me bled. We destroyed Valkyrie ships. I need to use that word, even though it makes something in my stomach twist. Because what happened in that engagement was not a game. Every targeting solution that resolved, every confirmed hit that breached a hull, was the death of a ship, and the death of everyone aboard it. A Valkyrie cruiser took a direct hit to its reactor housing from the Gallipoli's forward battery at a range so close, I could see the individual hull plates buckle on the visual display. The ship did not explode dramatically the way ships explode in stories. It came apart. The hull peeled open, atmosphere venting in a plume of crystallized gas and tumbling debris, and I watched it on my screen, and I knew that hundreds of living beings had just ceased to exist. Not combatants, not statistics, beings who had families and histories and fears and hopes and futures they would never reach, because they were in the wrong ship at the wrong time, in a battle that their supreme commander had started and could not stop. The Valkyrie fought back with everything they had, and they fought well. I will not diminish them. They were not cowards, and they were not incompetent. Their gunners were accurate under pressure. Their damage control teams were fast and effective. Their individual ship commanders showed tactical skill and personal courage that deserved a better cause. A Valkyrie cruiser rammed a human frigate rather than allow it to escape a firing solution, sacrificing itself to protect a damaged battlecruiser. A destroyer squadron held its position under sustained fire for 6 full minutes to cover the retreat of a crippled transport carrying wounded. They were warriors, real warriors, not the ceremonial kind. And in the crucible of actual combat, stripped of the rituals and traditions and comfortable certainties that had defined them for 6 centuries, many of them fought with a desperate bravery that deserved better than the situation their supreme commander had created. The Gallipoli took a plasma round through the tactical deck at the 53-minute mark. I did not hear the impact. There was a flash of light so bright it burned through my closed eyelids, a wave of heat that felt like opening an oven, and then I was on the floor. My console was shattered. The overhead had collapsed partially, twisted metal hanging down like broken fingers, and sparks rained from severed power conduits in streams of orange and white. My left arm was numb from the shoulder down. I looked at it and saw blood soaking through my uniform sleeve from a wound I could not feel, which meant the nerve damage was significant enough to block the pain signal, which meant the wound was worse than it looked. Around me, the tactical center was in ruins. 2 of my team were down, not moving. A third was pulling herself across the floor toward an emergency medical kit mounted on the wall, leaving a dark smear on the deck plates behind her. Harlow's voice came through the emergency communication channel. The primary bridge had taken a hit 20 minutes earlier, and she was commanding from the secondary bridge 2 decks below. Her voice was steady, not calm. Calm is a feeling. This was something harder than calm, something that exists beyond the boundary of emotion, in the territory where duty and will fuse together and become the same thing. Tactical. Report. I pulled myself upright with my good arm. I found a functioning auxiliary console, wiped the blood off the screen with my sleeve, because I had nothing else, and brought up what remained of my sensor feed. The picture was chaos, data fragmentary, some feeds dead, others corrupted. But through the chaos, I could see the shape of the battle. 57 Valkyrie ships confirmed destroyed. 112 additional, with significant damage, combat effectiveness degraded. Their formation has completely collapsed. Remaining ships are fighting in isolated groups of 10 to 20, with no fleet-level coordination. Our losses are 31 ships destroyed, significant damage across most surviving vessels. I paused as new data resolved on my screen. The third destroyer group is engaging Torvon's flagship. That last piece of information changed everything. 4 human destroyers, the Osprey, the Merlin, the Swift, and the Falcon, had punched through the disintegrating Valkyrie outer screen and were closing on Torvon's flagship from 4 different vectors. The flagship was the largest warship in the Valkyrie fleet, a vessel so massive it had its own internal gravity generators and carried a crew of over 3,000. Under normal circumstances, 4 destroyers would not have survived the approach. The flagship's defensive batteries alone could have swatted them from the sky. These were not normal circumstances. The flagship's escorts had been drawn away by the fragmenting battle, pulled out of position by human ships that struck and vanished and struck again from different angles. The flagship's shield coverage had gaps where damage from earlier engagements had degraded the emitter arrays. And the 4 human destroyers executed their approach with a synchronization that was not directed from a central command, but emerged spontaneously from 4 independent crews, making the same assessment at the same time, and acting on it without waiting for orders, without coordinating, without asking permission. They hit the flagship simultaneously. 4 ships, 4 angles, 4 concentrated salvos aimed at the shield gaps my earlier tactical data had identified and transmitted across the fleet. The flagship's engines went dark. Its weapon systems flickered and fell silent one by one. Its shields collapsed in sections, like a wall crumbling brick by brick under the weight of its own compromised foundation. Torvon broadcast the retreat order. His voice was different. The authority was still present, still commanding, but something underneath it had cracked. A foundation that had supported the weight of 6 centuries of certainty had given way, and the sound of it was unmistakable, even through the static and the noise and the chaos of a battle that was ending in the worst possible way for the species that had started it. He ordered his fleet to disengage, to regroup at the system's edge, to prepare for faster-than-light withdrawal. The order went out across every Valkyrie frequency, and the surviving ships obeyed. They broke away from engagements, turned their damaged hulls toward the system boundary, and ran. Not all of them made it. When the silence came, it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The void around New Carthage was filled with wreckage. Valkyrie wreckage. Human wreckage. Metal and frozen atmosphere and things I forced myself not to think about, spinning slowly in the starlight, in an expanding field of debris that would orbit this system's star for millennia. 837 Valkyrie ships destroyed. 312 additional disabled or damaged, severely enough to be permanently combat effective. The remaining fleet, less than half its original strength, limped away at faster-than-light speed, leaving the battlefield and its dead to the silence and the cold. Human losses. 71 ships destroyed. 4,217 people killed. I sat in the wreckage of the tactical center aboard the Gallipoli, and I felt nothing like victory. My arm was bleeding through the field, dressing someone had wrapped around it. My crewmates were dead or injured around me. The deck was covered in debris and fluid, and the acrid smell of burned systems that would take weeks to repair. Somewhere in the debris field outside, 71 human ships were tombs, their crews sealed inside in the dark and the cold, and they would drift in that orbit forever, unless someone came to bring them home. And the Valkyrie, those 837 ships, tens of thousands of Valkyrie, who had followed their supreme commander into a battle he started because his pride could not survive the alternative. Warriors who had believed so completely in their own supremacy, so totally in the foundational myth of their civilization, that they had flown into combat against a species they underestimated and never imagined this outcome. They were wrong. They were tragically, devastatingly, historically wrong, and they paid for being wrong with their lives. The aftermath unfolded with the grim inevitability of a landslide once the first stone has shifted. Within 48 hours, the Valkyrie Military Council deposed Torvan. He was stripped of his command, removed from the Supreme Commander's seat that his family had occupied for 3 generations, and placed under arrest on charges of reckless command and unauthorized military action, resulting in catastrophic losses. The Council issued a formal ceasefire across all fronts and opened emergency diplomatic channels with Earth Fleet Command. Within a week, the vassal worlds completed their legal challenges. Every subjugation treaty the Valkyrie had enforced through the Kael'than system was declared void by coalition arbitration courts. 14 species gained their full sovereignty and independence, for the first time in decades or centuries. The Valkyrie economy, stripped of its tribute income and its preferential trade agreements and the military contracts that depended on its reputation for invincibility, entered a freefall that would take years to stabilize. The reform movement that had been suppressed and silenced for generations surged into the political vacuum left by Torvan's fall and discovered that the population, traumatized by the defeat at New Carthage, was finally ready to listen to alternatives. The coalition formally censured the Valkyrie Dominion for unprovoked military aggression against a member species and elevated humanity to full strategic partnership status within the organization. Our seat at the table was no longer provisional. It was permanent, reinforced by the blood of 4,000 people who had stood between a civilian world and a fleet that outnumbered them 7-1 and had not moved. But I noticed something in the weeks and months that followed the battle. Something in the way the other species looked at us when they thought we were not watching. Before the Kael'than, they had been curious about us, the new species, the interesting newcomers. After the war game, they had been impressed. Genuinely, openly impressed by what we had demonstrated. Now, after New Carthage, they were afraid. Not afraid that we would attack them, not afraid of our weapons or our ships or our military strength. Afraid of what we were. Afraid of the thing that Grace Whitfield had shown them in the arena. The thing that 12 unnamed soldiers had demonstrated in the station module. The thing that 312 ships had proven in the fire, and silence, and horror of real combat. We were not the greatest warriors in the galaxy. We were not the most disciplined, or the most honorable, or the most technically sophisticated, or the most powerful. We were the species that had spent 10,000 years fighting each other with every weapon we could invent, in every environment we could reach, under every condition that nature and human cruelty could devise. We had fought in trenches and jungles and deserts and oceans and frozen tundra and burning cities and mountain passes and open plains. We had fought with sticks and stones and swords and spears and guns and artillery and aircraft and tanks and submarines and missiles and weapons, so terrible that we had agreed to ban them because even we were horrified by what they could do. We had committed horrors against each other that would make the Valkyrie physically ill if they understood the details. And from all of it, from the millennia of bloodshed and suffering and loss, we had distilled a single, terrible, hard-won understanding that no other species in the galaxy possessed. War is not a contest. It is not a ritual or a demonstration of superiority or a path to glory or a proving ground for honor. War is the worst thing any thinking species can inflict upon another, and the only justification for fighting one is because the cost of not fighting is higher than the cost of the blood and the fire and the shattered lives that war demands. The Valkyrie had built a civilization on the idea that war was their purpose, their identity, their highest calling, and their deepest source of meaning. They had turned it into an art form, a religion, a national celebration, a cultural centerpiece. And when they brought that art to bear against a species that understood war, not as a calling, but as a catastrophe, they discovered that the difference between a warrior culture and a survivor culture is the difference between a display sword and a scar. The sword is beautiful and sharp and impressive hanging on the wall. The scar is ugly and permanent, and it teaches you, in a language that goes deeper than words or conscious thought, to never let it happen again. 3 months after the Battle of New Carthage, I stood in a corridor of Pinnacle Reach and watched a Vale Cori diplomatic shuttle dock at the station. I was still wearing a brace on my left arm. The nerve damage from the plasma round had been repaired, but the muscles were still rebuilding, and the doctors had told me it would be another month before I had full use of it again. I did not mind the brace. It reminded me of things I did not want to forget. A new Vale Cori envoy emerged from the shuttle. She was young, by Vale Cori standards. Tall, four-armed, with skin unmarked by ritual scarring or kill marks. She was the first Vale Cori diplomat I had ever seen without visible marks of combat on their body. She carried a diplomatic portfolio instead of a weapon, and she moved through the corridor with the careful, measured steps of someone navigating ground that had shifted beneath her species' feet and had not finished shifting yet. She was there to begin the long, difficult, uncertain process of negotiating a new relationship between the Vale Cori Dominion and the rest of the galaxy. A relationship not built on dominance or fear or the memory of 600 years of martial supremacy that had ended in fire over a colony world, but on something more fragile and more demanding and more honest. She passed me in the corridor. Our eyes met. She did not posture. She did not threaten or challenge, or look at me with the contempt that every Vale Cori I had encountered before the Kael'than had directed at every human they saw. She nodded, a small, quiet gesture, one being recognizing another, nothing more and nothing less. I nodded back. It was the first honest gesture I had ever received from a member of her species, and I held on to it the way you hold on to a small flame in a dark room. It was not much. It was fragile. It would take years of work and patience and difficult conversations before it grew into anything that could survive a strong wind. But it was real. It existed. And in that moment, standing in the corridor of a space station at the edge of known space, with the weight of 4,000 names on my conscience, it was enough. Because the truth that the galaxy learned at New Carthage was not that humanity was the strongest or the fiercest or the most dangerous species in the stars. The truth was simpler and sadder and more important than any of that. The truth was that we knew what war really cost, because we had been paying that price for longer than anyone could remember, and the scars were written into our bones. And the greatest gift we could give the galaxy was not our strength or our speed, or our terrible, hard-won skill at ending lives. It was our scars. Our ugly, painful, blood-bought understanding that the only war worth winning is the last one. I turned and walked back toward the Gallipoli. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But the corridor was quiet, and the stars outside the viewport were steady, and for the first time in months, the cold knot that had lived in my stomach since 300 Vale Cori warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel, and changed the shape of the galaxy had loosened. Not gone, not forgotten, but loosened, just enough to let me breathe.